Council President Basin is up and left. Still on the-
You guys, church isn't this quiet. Do you?
The feed's off, you gotta be careful.
I see.
What do you always
Got me
say?
golfing in?
Can't go silent.
Golf, I'm not a golfer now. So the answer to that question is no.
That's a no. A certain painter out of Bronson Park says she's constantly nervous that she's going to be visited and have to explain.
No, no, she shouldn't be working this kind of weather.
She waited till the afternoon.
Okay.
All right. We're getting underway in about 10 seconds. No, Mr. Engel's not here for me to hassle about that. 3. Excellent. 2, 1. Good evening, and welcome to the special meeting of Defiance City Council tonight, Tuesday, July 19th, 2022. Before we get underway, would you mind bowing your head with me? Heavenly Father, as we gather this evening for this special meeting, this beautiful summer day, our minds may tend to stray on any number of other things. But Lord, we would ask that you'd be present with us, that we could remain focused with the task at hand, that we could be responsible stewards of the responsibility that the people of Defiance are trusting us with. Help us encourage and correct and exhort each other with our words and actions and attitudes this evening. Lord, we do this for the people who are trusting us in Defiance and for your glory, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Would you stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
To call this meeting to order. Let the record show that all members of council are present except for 2 of us. Mr. Engel let us know last time that he would be out of town this evening, and Mrs. Crutch as well. Do we have a motion to excuse Mr. Engel from the meeting this evening? Motion? Second, Mr. Mast. All those in favor of excusing Mr. Engel this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Right, we'll excuse him. And we have a motion to excuse Mrs. Crutch.
So moved.
So moved. Second, Mr. Uresti. All those in favor of just excusing Mrs. Crutch this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, well, we have a couple interesting items for the meeting this evening. First up, this evening we have a discussion about the integrated watershed plan. John Lyons from Strand Incorporated is here this evening to address us. Well, thanks for being our guest this evening.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to present really what amounts to probably 3 to 4 years of work with the city staff here on this plan. So again, this is the document that really represents past few years of work in terms of what the city needs to commit to achieve compliance with the Clean Water Act. And before I've got about a 30-minute presentation, which is, we're gonna cover a lot of ground in 30 minutes, but before I get too deep into it, I I want to take a moment to acknowledge the city staff. This work product is really the result of significant collaboration with the city. Jen English, Mark, Melinda, John, Sean, the mayor was involved in some of the meetings. Ryan, we welcomed him to the world of sewers soon after he joined. And I do want to particularly acknowledge Jeff Leonard. Jeff had a vision to try to comply with the Clean Water Act in a way that was different than most communities in the state of Ohio and actually most communities around the nation. And Jeff was passionate about this. There was a number of times where we met with Ohio EPA and Jeff would basically say, you know, we have an obligation to spend ratepayers' money responsibly. We want to maximize our return on investment. We want to maximize water quality improvement. And we have a vision for doing this differently. And ultimately, Ohio EPA got on board with us and sort of aligned your city team's vision with some of the new regulations that are coming out. And the result of it is this document. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that while the document that you see here represents a significant investment for your city, it goes beyond that. This truly has the potential to be a model of how to address water quality issues in Ohio. So, and I'll try to touch on that a little bit as we move through. But this is called an integrated watershed improvement plan. If you were with the city and involved years ago, you probably heard the term long-term control plan. This is sort of a different version of that. It has long-term control plan elements in it, but it addresses a more broader range of issues. And recently, you know, US EPA has embraced this more holistic view and are promoting it across the country. So again, just as some quick general background, and I'm going to try to hit the next probably 5 or 6 slides fairly quickly because it's background information, but feel free to stop me at any time and we can dive into any details that you need to. So the map on the right is the city of Defiance. The lines, the colored lines on it are your sewer system, the wastewater collection system. The little red dots represent what we refer to as combined sewer overflows. So during periods of rainfall, stormwater and wastewater collect in a single pipe and oftentimes discharge at those red locations. And the yellow star to the right is the wastewater treatment plant. And under current conditions right now, you have 27 permitted combined sewer overflows. So this is just real quick background for anyone who's not familiar with what a combined sewer is. Basically the wastewater from properties in the city go into a collection system and into larger diameter sewers. And then when it rains in these combined systems, stormwater is also conveyed by these single pipe systems. But again, periodically, because of the magnitude or intensity of the rainfall, these systems are designed to overflow and discharge to local receiving streams. So I thought I would, again, try to summarize some of the background over the last many, many years, beginning prior to 1998, actually. You submitted a plan per EPA requirements to reduce the frequency and volume of your combined sewer overflows. That plan was submitted, you began implementing projects. EPA then decided to enter into what's called a consent order. It's just a legal document that says the city is going to do the following steps according to the following schedule. And began this process of collaborating with Ohio EPA, implementing projects, and then measuring the results of that. So this carries us through really 2015, and then you submitted at that point an updated long-term control plan. And this represents sort of a significant turning point in this story, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But the results of your CSO control efforts to date, you've invested approximately $60 million in system improvements. You've eliminated 4 what are called separate sanitary sewer overflows, eliminated 16 combined sewer overflows, reduced CSO discharges by about 163 million gallons per year, and you've done significant monitoring of the collection system. And most importantly, and I think this is a big factor in how we got here today, the city has demonstrated significant progress and it has established a very collaborative and trusting relationship with Ohio EPA. There's a lot of communities out there that try to do as little as possible, and Defiance has always been sort of a leader and always trying to do the right thing and comply with the regulations. So again, in 2015, an updated long-term control plan was submitted that represented about an additional $50 million in control projects. And at that point, some questions were being asked both by Ohio EPA and the city in terms of, do we want to continue to go down this road? And the majority of the approach to CSO reduction at that point was what's called sewer separation, which is building new separate storm sewers and separating the sewers from a single pipe to 2 pipes, one wastewater and one stormwater. And while that can be effective, it's very disruptive and it's very costly. So at that point, again, a lot of questions were raised were to the end of what are we going to achieve? We spend this $50 million, we continue to separate our sewers and just focus on combined sewer overflows. What happens at the end of all this? And if you think about it, these combined sewers, the pollutant of concern that really, when they discharge, that enters the streams is bacteria. But if you think of your local receiving streams, the Maumee, the Auglaize, and then further downstream, Lake Erie, right? We all heard stories of algae blooms and nutrient problems, right? So here's pictures of your river and the algae blooms that are resulting from too many nutrients in the stream. And city staff began challenging, Ohio EPA began challenging me and saying, that's our issue. That's what the public sees. What can we do to address that? We know we have to comply with the Clean Water Act, but how can we do it so that we also tackle the real pollutant of concern? So, the Clean Water Act specifically makes reference to what's called watershed approaches to CSO control planning. And the key language here is that you do have to address CSOs to a certain extent, but the blue text calls out what EPA acknowledges, that CSOs could well be less significant contributors to non-attainment of water quality standards than stormwater upstream sources. In such cases, a large expenditure on CSO control could result in negligible improvement in water quality. And this is what your staff said, that's what we're concerned about. We don't want to spend $50 million for negligible benefit. That's not good stewards of public money. So it was these references in the Clean Water Act and the associated guidance documents that provided the basis to go back to OEPA and say, wait a minute, we think there's a better way. And that ultimately led to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is this integrated plan. So in 2019, Congress enacted the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act that officially recognized integrated planning as a voluntary path to Clean Water Act compliance. So what is the city's integrated plan and why does it make sense? So your plan addresses CSO control, the blue element in this circle. It also deals with source water protection, asset management. And if you think about it, this city's relatively old, and portions of this city were built 100 years ago. And there's pipes in the ground that need work, need repair, need upgrading. So if you turn all your attention and all your fiscal resources to building new infrastructure, what happens to that old infrastructure? It just continues to get older, deteriorate, and basically you run the risk of running it to failure. And if you run infrastructure to failure, all the data says you will end up paying 5 times more to replace it then than if you had a more proactive program. So asset management is part of this. And we'll get into some of the specific projects where we've combined an improvement to a major asset into a CSO reduction project as well. Nutrient reduction. There's a whole element of this plan that is focused on what we call water quality improvement projects and nutrient reduction. And then septic system removal. Now, this is a big emphasis to EPA. So where you were before, going back to 1998 and up into 2015, was right in this blue box, CSO control. That was your focus. And that's where EPA wanted you back then. But the world has changed. Defiance has said, we want to be a leader in this area. And so Defiance has developed this more holistic plan that includes all those elements. So then we get into this chronology, and I don't want to bore you with all this effort. I really do, but Melinda said I had to keep it moving. Because there's been a lot of meetings with Ohio EPA. There's been a lot of meetings with the city. Jen spends half her life out there meeting with watershed groups, trying to build collaborative partners to work on this together. And then we hit this turning point right here where finally Ohio EPA said, all right, what do you have in mind? Let's talk about it. And we had a number of meetings with them, and we presented concepts, and they gave us feedback, and we adjusted a little bit. And we got to the point where we said, we generally know what OEPA wants and what we want. We think we found that sweet spot. And then we documented that in this, what we refer to as our second amended consent order. So this was sort of the legal document where Ohio EPA recognized that we were changing course from where we were before, and we were heading off in a new direction. And again, I really want to comment that, you know, sometimes the agencies get a bad rap, and Ohio EPA has been just outstanding in this process. They challenged us, they questioned us, but at the end of the day, they wanted to see this happen, and they've been a very good partner in this effort. So in this consent order, it really boils down to, it's got a bunch of legal stuff in it because Sean was part of it. But it basically says you need to install some flow meters in your system to continue to monitor how your system responds to wet weather. They gave us 8 what we refer to as near-term projects. You got to complete these 8 projects while you're developing your integrated watershed plan. And then they wanted us to calibrate and validate a hydraulic model. There's a complex computerized representation of your sewer system that we can use to evaluate various alternatives. So we can say, if we make this pipe bigger, what does that do to CSOs? If we put a storage tank here, what does that do? We can run the model, and then the model helps inform us to figure out what the most cost-effective projects are. And then the big date, submit an IWIP by August 1st, 2022. And that's what we're very close to doing. And again, the rest of the presentation now is going to turn our attention to the document and what we're proposing to Ohio EPA. So let's begin with your current system performance. This graphic shows you, it's a little bit difficult to read, but each one of these bar graphs represent a CSO. And they're numbered. Each CSO has a unique number. And then the y-axis here represents activations in a typical year. So you can see that some are activating up over 25 times, maybe that's 30 times. There's still a number of low activation ones, but this is sort of where we're starting today. And this isn't, you know, starting at ground zero. This is after $60 million of investment. You guys have had significant reductions in your CSO program and system. So this is sort of like, we've made a lot of progress, and now we just got to take that final step. Important to point out that you have 26 active CSOs. There's 27 permitted, but one of them never goes off. 75 million gallons of total annual overflow volume. And that may sound like a lot. In the context of the CSO world, it's really not. And in the context of flows in the Maumee River, it's really not. But it's still, we need to do better. 58% of the annual overflows occur in the 4 largest rain events in the typical year, which makes sense, right? If you look at an average year of rainfall, there's a couple of rain events that are very large that overwhelm your system. And that's where most of the overflow volume is occurring. So to take it from there to where we believe Ohio EPA wants us to get to, here's the proposed plan. So again, significant collaboration with Ohio EPA, and we've broken these project types into four major categories. First are wastewater treatment plant projects. Second category are projects out in the collection system. The third are asset management projects. And the fourth are water quality improvement projects. So again, think back to the circle of the integrated plan. Those are some of the major elements, and now we'll go through the individual projects. So at the treatment plant, the proposed projects include new screening. And currently you do have screens at the front end of your plant, and think of screens as the way it's sort of like this first filter. And depending on the opening of those screens, certain stuff can get through. And so the smaller the openings, the tighter the filter, the cleaner the flow that gets into your plant. So, based on our evaluation of the treatment plant, the current screen size is really, it's a little bit too big, the openings. And then in coordinating with Mark and the needs and the problems he's seen at the plant, we're recommending replacing the existing mechanical screen with a new screen and wash press. That's a $500,000 project. Then once flows get above a certain elevation, beyond secondary capacity, flows then bypass. And right now there's a bar rack, but it's really not a screen. So again, there's the potential that debris is bypassing the screens and getting into the treatment plant and causing problems further back in the system. So we're recommending replacing that manual bar screen with also a mechanical screen. And then the third element is adding a septage receiving station. So this septic haulers can come to a nice septage receiving station, and it actually will generate revenue for the city. So again, we've done a very detailed evaluation of the treatment plant. We've coordinated very closely with Mark and his team on what their needs are, both currently and long-term, as we begin to try to push more flow to that plant. And these are the recommended projects, and they total about $1.5 million. Any questions on that? So now we'll go out into the collection system. And again, a lot of this has to do with using the hydraulic model that we have of the system to evaluate different projects and their benefits. And the first project is what we refer to as weir optimization. So at each of the combined sewer overflows, there's a diversion structure. So as it's raining and the flow builds up, if you think about it, there's a little wall. So as long as the flow is low, it hits that wall and drops down and goes to the treatment plant. But as the flows build up, they spill over that wall, the system relieves itself out the CSO, and it goes to either the Auglaize or the Maumee. That wall is set at a certain elevation, but with the model, we can really fine tune, what if we raise that 3 inches or 4 inches? You can reduce the activations down from, say, 15 down to 6 or 4. So that weir optimization is sort of low cost fine tuning of your system and the regulator structures at the 27 overflows. The next project is the Summit Street storm sewer separation. And that's a project where there's already a separate storm sewer in the ground, but it was connecting into the combined system. So with very little additional pipe, we can extend it around the combined system and discharge it out the overflow directly to the stream, separate stormwater. So it doesn't go into your system and it helps reduce overflows. Hopkins Street sewer separation, again, it's another example where we can install some new storm and capture significant drainage area and keep it out of the combined system, which helps reduce the flows in the system and reduces the overflows. That one's a little bit more extensive than the Summit Street. We've estimated that to be about $2 million. This next item is the Kingsbury force main. And I have a graphic on this in the next slide, so what I'd like to do is just hold off detailed on that until after this. And then the last element is a 3 million gallon CSO storage basin near the plant, on the property adjacent to the plant. And what this allows us to do is the fundamental concept of the CSO control is to get flow from the Kingsbury pump station, as much flow as we can, and get it to the treatment plant. And once we upgrade that Kingsbury force main and look at the maximum pumping capacity of that Kingsbury pump station, we can get more flow to the plant than the plant can handle right now. This is a future condition. So what we want to do is put a big storage basin there. So when we get those excess flows, we put them in the storage basin. The flow stops subsiding as the rain dissipates, and then we go from that storage basin through the treatment plant and treat that flow. So these projects, all told, are $17.4 million. And this is the one that I wanted to spend a second on, which is the Kingsbury force main. So this is the Kingsbury pump station, located right at the confluence, and here's a picture of it. You can see it from Pontiac Park pretty clearly. And there's a big force main that conveys this flow. It's about 15,000 feet, Mark, I think, to the treatment plant. That force main today is in poor condition. That force main needs to be repaired and or replaced. So no matter what we do with CSO control, that's a project that the city would have to deal with at some point. So what we've done is we've incorporated that into this integrated plan, and we're going to upsize this force main, increase the capacity of it, get more flow to the treatment plant, and as we get more flow through here to the plant, we in essence are pumping down the flow that's in the system upstream that previously was discharging out the overflows. So the pump station was actually a bit of a bottleneck. If we can increase the capacity of that and get the flow to the plant, we have a significant reduction in CSOs, and this investment, which we're getting CSO benefit for, you get the dual benefit of upgrading an asset that you were going to have to deal with anyway. So that's the beauty of integrated planning.
Will that go into a storage tank, or where's that extra that's gonna be pumped there go to?
So depends on what the flow rate coming through that force main is. In most cases, it'll go through the treatment plant. The treatment plant secondary capacity is 8 million gallons and the primary capacity is 14. Once we hit that 14 million gallon per day rate, then we go to the storage basin, and then storage basin, as the flow gets stored, will then come back into the treatment plant.
So what's that moving now compared to what you're gonna move it to? Tonnage wise, or?
Say that one more time.
What is that pipe moving through now, gallon wise, compared to what you wanna take it up to?
So right now, we're seeing that system generally pumped at about 5.5 to 6 million gallons per day. Under the future condition, we want it to be about 14.5 million gallons per day.
Then we can hold that at the plant.
And then
It'll
you can
take that.
treat and or hold. It's a combination of treatment and holding. Now, there are a couple of storm events, and the typical year that was selected with OEPA's concurrence was 1998. So that is the rainfall year that we use when we do our modeling. Generally, it is typical, but the thing to point out in that year has a 5-year storm event. A 5-year storm event is not typical in a typical year, okay? So when we look at the modeling of this system, there is that one event, that top event, that sometimes you have the potential to exceed the capacity of that storage basin, in which case, and I do have a picture later if you want to see it, if we exceed the capacity of that storage basin and the plant, there will be a discharge to the Maumee down there. So if we get into a circumstance where a really large event and we're pushing more flow to the plant than the plant and the basin can handle, we will be allowed to discharge and provide a relief to that storage basin to the Maumee.
I just know because before you said something about a storage tank on the other side, I was wondering where we was at on this side, you know?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
We said about putting that big storage tank in.
Yeah.
But that's why I was wondering if this was gonna require a storage tank too on this end.
No.
Okay.
This is we're gonna increase the force main?
I got you.
Okay.
Oh, and just because I'm curious, how old is the current Kingsbury force main?
Can you help me with that, Mike?
It was put
Ish.
in, I believe it's 1956 or
Okay.
58.
So that's something
And
that's going to
back in
be.
the 70s, we dug up several joints and replaced the bolts. The bolts had all rotted. And nothing's been done since then.
Okay. So it's a problem that's just waiting to be addressed.
From Mercy
Anyways.
Hospital to the entrance of the sewer plant, it runs right down the middle of East 2nd Street.
That's not inconvenient at all.
Will the new force main require new or additional pumps, or will the current pumps be adequate?
So we will be coordinating with Mark to your Kingsbury pump station is another issue as well that will have to be addressed at some point. It's not included in this plan, but that Kingsbury pump station is problematic. It is old. I don't think it complies with the code. The issue at some point here in the near future is going to come to, do you retrofit that and try to sort of fix it in place, or do you build a new station? And we've done some preliminary analysis with Mark. We believe the current station has room in it that you could put enough pumps in there to pump 14.5 MGD. At some point, there's gonna have to be a discussion of, do you keep putting lipstick on the pig, or do you just put in a whole new station? So again, that's an asset management project that is not too far off in the future. We've talked about it with the city, and I think at this point, the plan is there's some new pumps in there. Let's see how they can function. Let's see what kind of capacity we can get out of it, and have this discussion about the timing of the pump station in terms of how that would fit in financially with everything that we're trying to do.
Does that system have to be put in the same location, or can we run along the river, or do we have to come tear up streets and everything?
So the alignment of the new Kingsbury force main is something that we've done some preliminary assessments of, and there's been a lot of discussion with Mark and Melinda about trying to find an alignment that isn't as disruptive as putting it in the current location. So that's to be determined.
Okay, it would make sense to me to run it closer to the river and down if you could. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, so now we're going to transition to what we're calling example water quality projects. Now, in the IWIP, we have specifically called out some specific types of projects that would improve water quality, and the city over the next 7 to 8 years is committing to roughly $1 million in these projects. But the specific project types will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and there'll be coordination with Ohio EPA to determine which ones the city wants to invest in. So we'll run through some of those examples now. So septic system elimination, wetland creation, edge of field treatment, detention basin retrofitting, and water quality monitoring. That's what we've identified so far as these are probably the types of candidate projects we're going to do. We feel fairly certain that at least 5 septic systems will be part of, elimination will be part of this project. Which exact locations and systems will be replaced, we don't have that yet, but that will be coordinated with the agency. Wetland creation, like this system up here, the city has been working with some federal agencies on some sites locally. It's a challenge to commit to a specific site right now just because of property ownership and environmental and historic issues that come up when you start excavating a site. But it does look like there's some real potential in Defiance to build some wetlands and have a significant nutrient reduction to the Maumee or the Auglaize. Edge of field treatment pilot projects, and this is a system that again, the city has coordinated with a local university professor who is developing some of this technology. We're not sure this is exactly what will be built, but this type of practice can be installed for about $20,000. And the goal would be get some pilot projects in the ground, do some pre and post monitoring, figure out which types of these projects you get the most bang for the buck on, and then build those. The concern we had was if we come out of the gate committing to a couple of these types of projects, and then the monitoring says it's really not as effective as we had hoped, we didn't want to be locked in on that. So we want to be able to be flexible and adapt based on data that we see and the potential for benefits. And then detention basin retrofitting, the city has a number of detention basins. Typically, these are designed for flood mitigation, but they can be readily retrofitted to provide a water quality benefit as well. So we'll be trying to identify good candidate projects for that. And then water quality monitoring. Jen has been a huge advocate of, there's a lot of talk out there about a lot of different practices, and there's a tendency to sort of just get the backhoe and the pipe and go out and start putting stuff in the ground. And Jen has sort of reined us in a little bit, said, let's do this intelligently, let's collect some monitoring data, and let's make sure that we are realizing the benefits that we think before we advance additional projects. So those are the elements that are being incorporated in the IWIP. So in our discussions with Ohio EPA early on, one of the things they asked us to do is say, all right, you want to go away from a traditional long-term control plan and you want to do this integrated plan, like what's the water quality benefits of doing this? So there's some assumptions in this, it's a desktop analysis, but basically this shows you bacteria reduction from a traditional plan versus the plan that we are recommending, and then this is the phosphorus reduction. In both cases, we've been able to demonstrate a significant pollutant load reduction compared to a more traditional plan. And the beauty of this is that the more traditional plan would have been a lot more expensive. So, we get all these benefits, we get improved pollutant load reduction, and we can do it at a lower cost. So it really is a win-win. So now we'll jump into the costs. So I've touched on these projects, and when you total them up, it's $21.7 million. So that's your IWIP commitment from a capital investment perspective. So we've done some work with John and his group basically on affordability. Because as we make a commitment to doing these projects and we try to develop a schedule that is reasonable and affordable for the city, we had to look at your current financial condition. So this bar graph is existing conditions. And I'm gonna have to walk over because I can't read all the bars, I'm sorry. So the yellow bar is stormwater operations and maintenance expense. The red is sewer operation and maintenance. The green bar is your wastewater debt service. So you can see right now you have a significant obligation in debt service that diminishes over time. And then the purple, it's a tip of those. It's not a lot of money, but it is an element in your budget, stormwater capital projects. So those are your expenses today. And we've made some assumptions about inflation as you move out 30 years. And then the blue bar represents your revenue today. And what we've done is we've assumed that after 2023, for the purposes of this exercise, your revenue remains flat. Now we know that you guys regularly revisit your rates and revenue, but for this exercise, this is what we did. So from my perspective, trying to help you develop an appropriate schedule, what this showed me was that you really don't have much leeway and flexibility in terms of taking on new expenses until we get out here when our debt service starts being paid down. And at this particular time, we begin to have, I refer to this as headroom. We now have some headroom for some additional expenses. So what we've tried to do is we tried to marry up the timing of these projects that we're committing to with your current budgets and current revenue. So this is where we end up with the IWIP implemented. So you can see that as we get out to, I think it's 2037, with the new debt service and we worked with John to make some assumptions of certain projects would be paid for in cash out of your existing revenue stream. Larger projects would be funded with debt service, and we assumed rates and durations and a new debt service amount. That's represented in these purple bars. So basically, if your rates stay flat for the next 30 years, you will, when you get out here, your expenses will exceed your revenue. But it does seem like this is a manageable program with potentially minimal rate increases, or there's the potential for outside funding. The city is, pretty aggressive at looking for federal and state funding opportunities to these projects. But this is the picture today based on those assumptions with the IWIP implemented. Any questions on that?
What is the timeline?
So, what we're recommending based on the analysis that we did is a 15-year timeline for implementation of these projects. And I want to point out that while affordability is obviously a major consideration when you're trying to lay out a schedule like this, the other issue is that there's some relatively large projects here. If you think about that Kingsbury force main, you think about the work at the treatment plant, a big separation project, your team only has limited time to take on and manage these large projects. So you can see that what we tried to do is time and space the design and construction of these projects so there wasn't a lot of overlap, because it's not realistic really to think that your existing staff is able to juggle 2 or 3 of these at the same time. So we took, the weir optimization, which is pretty, easy, straightforward, low budget stuff. We put that early in the program. We've got some of the water quality projects scheduled, beginning in 2023. But then the major capital projects we've tried to space out over the next several years, culminating in year 15. And then so the result of all of this is upon implementation of these projects, you'll still have roughly 26 active CSO locations, but you'll be down to 30 million gallons in a typical year. 79% of the annual overflow occurs during the 2 largest rain events in the typical year. So there's 30 million gallons of overflow, but more than 20 of it is occurring in 2 events, these 2 really large events that occur in that typical year. And this is what's pretty impressive. 20 of the CSOs activate 4 or fewer times per year. And I will tell you, I study these spreadsheets more than I should. See them in my sleep. The vast majority of these really small activations, the volumes are in the thousands of gallons, 1,000 gallons. One of them is actually 200 gallons. That's kind of model noise. Our model's not that good. So, even though we're showing, 26 of these and 20 of them go off 4 times or fewer, these are very low volume, short duration overflows. The real impact is in those 2 big rain events. So this program achieves a very high level of control. It's consistent with what we told EPA that they would see when we submitted this. The projects are consistent with what we told EPA we would be committing to. So, I want to make it clear that this isn't something we sort of developed in a back room and we're sending it off to EPA and they're going to be like, oh my goodness, what is this? There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth. Even over the last month, we would call EPA and say, thinking about this, is that okay? And they'd be like, let me talk with my team. Yeah, that looks good. So we feel like, this has been a real good partnership, and not saying it's perfect and we're going to get a gold star right out of the gate, but it definitely is the product of a lot of discussion and collaboration. And I don't know if you want to spend any more time on this schedule. Yes, sir.
I just want to, as we commit to this, do you feel comfortable that the EPA will commit with us? Because I know from past experience, they tend to change viewpoints from time to time, and this is a long-term investment, so.
That's a difficult question to answer, but I will tell you that this commitment to integrated planning resulted in actually an amendment to the Clean Water Act. Integrated planning has now been incorporated into Section 402S of the Clean Water Act. When you get Congress to change the Clean Water Act, it's a pretty significant commitment. So the federal government is certainly committed. The Clean Water Act allows now for this type of plan to be submitted. And Ohio EPA, from my experience over the past 2 years, they have been major proponents of this. They've called statewide workshops. They invited every single CSO community to Columbus to promote integrated planning. And I would tell you that in my view, and I know I'm biased, but I believe this is one of the best integrated plans in terms of really speaking to the intent of integrated planning. Asset management, water quality improvement, CSO reduction. I mean, it checks all the boxes. I think it's a great model. I think Ohio EPA, they may fine tune it, but they're gonna be excited about it. And I think honestly, in a world where, it's more difficult to find money and things have become more expensive, this is good public policy, spending dollars to maximize your benefit. So, only time will tell, but I think this is it for the long run. I really do. I think it's a great model.
Mr. Resty.
Yeah, it's a good project. It fits in about everything that we are going to be needing, especially with our, like you said, a community with a lot of stuff that we need to get changed to make better. I think on our end of it, it's about a $30 million project projection. You said about 27 million or
22 million.
22 million.
Yeah.
It's a $22 million projection. And presently, with the long-term control plan that we have, it's being paid by our ratepayers. Is that where it's going to continue with as the expenses grow, we're going to reassess what we charge our ratepayers for our sewer, water, or just sewer?
Well, in this case, it's just sewer.
Okay.
But, so there are 4 major projects that will require us to go and borrow money through the state, which we've done for all the previous projects. And as the 2 graphs, the existing conditions and the future with the new debt would show, the proposal will be that we kick off each of those 4 projects in a time frame that coincides with current debt falling off the books. So as much as we can, we stabilize that debt service, the annual debt service, to be fairly level through the whole period. The 15-year plan means we've got 15 years to kick off the last project, but we'll be paying on that each project for 20 years. So in year 15, if we do the last project, that's 35 years from now, we'll still be paying before we pay it off. But so to kind of fine tune your timing question, it's 15 years to ultimately implement every project, and we'll space that over to coincide with current debt that falls off. But then each project has a 20-year payback. All the debt we've taken on for these projects have been 20-year debt. And as best as we can, Joe, we will, the point is to have the overall debt burden be consistent so that the rates are really fluctuating with the cost of operating the plant, payrolls, insurance, things like that, just normal operating.
I know that it's needed, but I guess we've all heard it. Council's heard it, the administration's heard it, that we keep on raising the rates that our ratepayers pay, and at what point will it stop? And the other part to it is it affordable?
It'll never stop.
And I guess the bottom line for me, it's a heck of a lot better than the $120 million original long-term control plan we had, which was never ending.
Correct.
And the only thing I would say is that's what I guess our our customers are gonna be asking us, you know, what is a better plan than just raising the rates every 4 years or 5 years, whenever we do it?
We have, you know, the increases of the last, we implemented a new rate model 4 or 5 years ago now, and the increases since after that first year where there was an adjustment have been very modest, like less than 2% a year. And, you know, ideally, we could maintain something along those lines, something that would coincide not with today's inflation, but with general inflation. And, you know, in the long run, you're not gonna be able to defeat inflation. I mean, costs are going to go up, they always have, they always will. But the major costs associated with these projects, the whole intent here is to moderate that and maintain consistency throughout the 35-year period of, you know, the end of the program to the last debt payment, in theory.
Okay.
If we didn't have these burdens, you know, that first graph is phenomenal. The current debt falls off between 2029, 2030, 2031. We have like $2.5 million of current debt service that would go away. And we would immediately lower the rates for those users, except for the fact we have a brand new list of projects we've got to implement. And the best we can do is to try and keep that as level as we can.
Is it, I guess, because I'm just asking, is it possible in any way that the general fund can absorb something if we put in a special fund for side growth for a large project that's not assessed to, you know, the ratepayers?
Legally, yes. I can give you 10 reasons why that's not a good idea, but we can talk about all that later.
Right. I'm just saying, I'm just talking, because they're going to be asking us, and I guess they're going to say, well, why can't the city just as a whole pay for it? And I'm looking at it that if it's a large project, we normally take that on as a city. And projects as we go on, if that's the way we're paying it, you know, as ratepayers, then that's all we can do. But
not to be too nerdy, but governmental accounting practices would say the water plant and the sewer plant should be self-sufficient. And they are. They weren't when I got here, they are now, and our plan is to continue to have them be so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Could I go to the last slide? Because, well, actually, let me go up one. This is the tribute to Jeff. And this was literally, this is going to be on the cover of the iWeb, but big challenges require broader and more strategic thinking on multiple fronts. We believe these innovative and collaborative efforts will lead to better outcomes for water quality, not just in Defiance, but throughout the Great Lakes. And again, Jeff was passionate about this, and I think, you know, was a big driver in how we got to where we are today. And one of the things we would like, if possible, is to ask your community, and we want feedback on anything that was presented tonight, and we provided an email address. Jen gets is the contact identified here. But then I proposed these 3 questions just to sort of help folks get thinking. But do you support the city's proposed integrated plan approach over the traditional approach? Do you agree that the proposed 15-year schedule is appropriate? And do you agree with the proposed prioritization of projects that we showed in that schedule? Certainly we want to hear any feedback on anything we discussed, but if we could get feedback on those 3 elements within the next 7 days, that would be wonderful. And obviously we're available to answer any questions that anyone might have as well. But the presentation is going to be on the website, so people can take a little time to look at it, study it, and then again, we welcome any feedback.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
further questions for our guest? We met this evening in a special meeting in order to discuss the integrated watershed plan, but also to discuss the issue of the Carter Road annexation. Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this was an exercise of your authority under Rule 3.3 of our Rules of Conduct and Procedure to set the agenda for the special meeting that belongs to you as Council President. The administration is asking for your consideration to remove the Carter Road annexation ordinance from the table. In order to do that, it requires a majority of the members that are then present or present tonight. And that would enable us to bring back the Carter Road annexation approval ordinance as the third reading at the next meeting.
All right. Last time we met, we tabled the Carter Road annexation issue. Do we have a motion to remove from the table the Carter Road annexation? We have a motion, Mr. Waxler, second, Mr. Rusty. Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Mast?
Yes.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Waxler?
Yes.
And Mr. Rusty?
Yes.
With that, it's approved that we removed it from the table. I'm assuming the next time we gather, we will be revisiting the issue.
Yep, we will have the ordinance for you, Mr. President.
Excellent. All right. And unless there are any citizens' concerns to speak directly to the issues that were discussed tonight, do we have a motion to adjourn this evening?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second, Mr. Mast. All those in favor of adjourning for this evening, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we are adjourned for this evening.